We know James Bond as the hero of the world's most famous series of spy books and spy films. But what can James Bond tell us about the real-life history of espionage? I'm joined today by Dr. Chris Smith, the author of the book The Last Cambridge Spy, and our resident expert at Coventry University on the history of espionage. So do you think James Bond has anything to tell us about the real history of espionage, or is it such a distortion as to be of very, very little value in relation to the historical truth of the British spy tradition?
So I think that there's shades of reality which emerge in James Bond. So for example, the book and the novel and the film From Russia with Love is about, essentially it's about attempting to capture a cipher machine, a way of encoding information, or actually encrypting information. Code and ciphers are two different things, but a way of encrypting information so that other people can't get at it. And that sort of thing actually happened, that people did try to steal these Enigma machines. For example, the crew of HMS Bulldog famously captured an Enigma machine from a sinking German U-boat. So in that sense, what Ian Fleming was doing or writing about has some shades of reality to it.
So for anyone who doesn't know, what was an Enigma machine?
So the Enigma machine was a device which was created around the end of the First World War into the very beginning years of the interwar period, which was designed to, I suppose, mechanise the creation of ciphers so that you could rapidly create a highly secure cipher system which had 159 quintillion possible keys. And to give you an idea about how large that number is, there were fewer seconds in the entire history of the universe than there are possible settings. So that's 18 zeros. So it's a hugely secure, mechanised system for its period. So the British were able to break it through a series of quite ingenious mathematical methods and devising their own machines for this purpose. So what we effectively see is that they're able to break it within 20 minutes by the time we get to the height of the Second World War. So what we've effectively got going on is the mechanisation of cryptography in the beginning of the interwar period around 1918, 1919, and then we have a mechanisation of cryptanalysis at the end of the interwar period and into the Second World War.
It sounds from what you're saying as though the history of espionage and the history of science to technology and, in a sense, forms of computing are very closely interconnected. Now, as you'll know, technology is key to the James Bond franchise. I was wondering if you could say, from your perspective as a historian, what you think about the kinds of technology that are used in Bond. Are there any other connections you can make between those and the things that are used in reality, or are they just pure speculation?
So there is a history within the context of espionage of using devices which we would consider to be quite Bondish, I suppose. So for example, in 1978, a man was assassinated in London with an umbrella, effectively, which was poisoned, which shot a poison pellet into his leg. So that's a kind of an example, I suppose, which we perhaps would imagine from James Bond. There's also other things as well, like small cameras which can be utilised to take photographs of documents. There's also bugging, which goes on as well. So there are some elements, I think, to the device. Obviously not the shooting cars, that really is a little bit outlandish. Or in one of the films, the car can go invisible, which seems a little bit kind of beyond reality. But there is that connection with technology. Certainly in terms of cryptanalysis, again, technology is hugely important. I spoke earlier about the mechanisation of cipher systems and the mechanisation of cryptanalysis. So there was a machine which was utilised by the German High Command called the Lorenz SZ40 and SZ42. And this, again, went over the radios, but it's a much more sophisticated rotor machine than even Enigma, much more sophisticated. And that actually required the invention, I suppose, of one of the world's first computers. Not necessarily the world's first computer, but certainly one of the world's first computers.
I wonder if you could say a bit more about the role that women have played in espionage. I mean, is the James Bond vision totally distorting in relation to that, or are there elements of truth in the kind of representation of gender that we get?
So from its earliest days, there were women working in British intelligence. So the British Intelligence Services are really formed in 1909 as an organisation called the Secret Service Bureau. And that was effectively 2 or 3 men initially. But soon after, they employ someone else, and he also employs a family member, a female family member who acts as a typist. And so right from the very beginning, there are women involved in these organisations. And there were thoughts about how they might be used. Obviously, one of the most famous alleged spies in history is Mata Hari, who again has this kind of femme fatale depiction. I mean, whether or not she actually was a spy is, I think, open to some debate, but that image has persisted. And it's certainly persisted in terms of popular culture. So, for example, if anyone's a fan of the Marvel films, then obviously Black Widow is a good example of this sort of special agent, part seductress, part kind of martial artist and assassin. So that still kind of remains. And there's been a lot of fear about women in terms of espionage. So there's a really famous poster from the Second World War, which is called "Keep Mum, She's Not So Dumb. Careless Talk Costs Lives," and it has a picture of a very glamorous blonde woman sitting quite seductively while three officers, each of the three British services, the Navy, the Army and the Air Force, are all basically above her talking, basically trying to get her attention. And the idea with her kind of ruby red lips is that actually maybe there's something innately kind of dangerous about attractive women, and that's kind of, I think, very much persists even to this day. There's this idea that that attractive, clever women are dangerous, and that quite often is replicated in terms of popular culture and spy culture and spy fiction. So certainly in the context of Britain, the British state has mobilised women for intelligence purposes as well, and not just in the kind of bureaucratic setting that I was talking about before. So Roald Dahl, the famous children's novelist, he had been a fighter pilot during the Second World War out in the Western Desert, and he'd been basically had an accident and hit his head and couldn't fly anymore. So he was dispatched off to the United States to work for an organisation called British Security Coordination, which was effectively MI6 in the United States. And basically they were trying to convince the Americans to join the Second World War on the Allied side, and also to nobble German spies who were operating in the United States as well. So we don't know exactly what they got up to in full, but it is probably likely up to and includes murder, for example, on American soil. That kind of thing might well have been going on. But Roald Dahl's job was basically to schmooze high society Americans and collect information from them, and that went up to and including forming intimate relationships with high society American women.
What role do you think the historian can play in the making of James Bond and similar spy films?
So I think certainly in terms of our research, getting a real feel for what say for example, I work on the 1940s and 50s were like, the 1930s were like. So I think that plays a role. Getting the ambience of these kinds of agencies would be quite good. And certainly there's been a lot of pretty decent spy films which have come out recently. So Bridge of Spies is a good example. There's The Courier, which came out recently as well, which I thought was an excellent film, which really, I think, captured a lot of the reality, I suppose, of that period. So I think the historian has that kind of role. But that also leads us in, for example, to the history graduates. So, for example, our graduates, people who study history, might go on to be creative figures within the film industry. They might go on to be authors and writers. And that experience of having studied the reality of espionage and then think about how they want to tell their own stories, construct their own creative vision, which then gets sold to the world, then I think that's really important. It kind of has that cultural inflection, which can only be good.
And of course, history gives you the kind of skills that you need in other professions associated with spying, things like government and the civil service. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because history teaches us how to think and how to look at the world, how to empathise with people in the past, but also the present. So the skills of the historian are effectively to collate large amounts of information, synthesise that material, to research it, to think about it, to contextualise it, ask questions of it, and then come up with answers. And basically you can use that in business, that skill set, you can use it in government, the civil service, but also politicians make use of it all the time. And it's not particularly surprising that so many of the senior politicians in the country happen to have history degrees or very closely related degrees, such as classics. So Joe Biden, the President of the United States, he read history at university. Boris Johnson, the current Prime Minister, he read classics. Jacob Rees-Mogg, obviously another very famous Conservative politician, he also read history. Previous Prime Minister Gordon Brown actually has a PhD in history, looking at the history of the Scottish Labour Party. So I think that history is a degree which opens so many doors because I think employers and people find it so valuable.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope you've enjoyed our video. If you'd like to know more about history at Coventry University and about our humanities programmes, then head over to our website, which is www.coventry.ac.uk. You can also give us a like and share our videos with other people. And we'll be making a series of videos in the near future, so why not subscribe to our channel as well.